In the final hour of daylight, a few climbers fought their way back to the chaos of High Camp. But for the rest, it looked grim. People have been caught before in storms high on Everest, but very few have survived.
The stranded climbers ran out of bottled oxygen. As the wind chill dropped to 100 degrees below zero, 17 climbers were still trapped on the mountain, including Rob. When night fell, most of the climbers hunkered down, just hoping to survive the night. When Paula called me that night, she reminded me that Rob's wife, Jan, was 7 months pregnant. We were all struggling to face the fact that we had friends high on the mountain in the storm, fighting for their lives, and that perhaps some of them weren't going to make it. I knew I wouldn't get much sleep. The next morning, we got word that 7 climbers were still missing. But one of the stranded climbers was still in radio contact, Rob Hall. He'd beaten the odds and survived a night of Arctic winds at 28,000 feet. Rob just couldn't find the strength to move, but he wasn't ready to give up.
So, clean the ice out of your mask and start moving. You got to pull yourself up over the
Talking to Rob on the radio was tough.
Start coming down. It's downhill from there.
There was nothing I could do for him. I was at middle camp, and he was at least a 2-day climb away.
Wait all day for him.
Using a makeshift radio patch, we then connected Rob with his wife Jan in New Zealand. When we heard them talking on the radio, we all lost it. We all started to cry. Later, they chose a name for their unborn child, and Rob went to sleep in sub-zero temperatures, but he didn't survive the night.
Just above the High Camp, a climber named Beck Weathers had been out in the storm for over 22 hours. He had been left for dead by other climbers. And then, nearly blind, his hands literally frozen solid, Beck stood up, left his pack, and desperately tried to walk.
All I knew was that as long as my legs would run and I could stand up, I was going to move toward that camp, and if I fell down, I was going to get up. And if I fell down again, I was going to get up. And I was going to keep moving until I either hit that camp or walked off the face of that mountain.
Beck's teammates were certain he was lying dead in the snow, so they were pretty startled when he staggered into the High Camp. Beck's life hung by a thread, but Ed was determined to rescue him.
The camera team put down their gear and followed me up the mountain into the storm. We just lost Rob. We sure as hell weren't going to lose Beck, too. He was so blind and so weak that we had to support him and physically place his feet in each step. But even with our help, Beck just didn't have the strength to get through the icefall. His frostbitten hands would have to be amputated, so time was critical. We had to get him out of there soon.
A helicopter rescue at over 20,000 feet seemed out of the question. Up here, the air is so thin that the blades have almost nothing to bite into. At any moment, the aircraft may lose lift and fall out of the sky. The only previous flight up here ended in a crash. But a Nepalese pilot named Colonel Madan KC decided to risk it. Even when the helicopter flew up above the icefall, Beck's survival was still very much in doubt.
The pilot had trouble setting down. No one knew if they would crash.
After the climbers loaded Beck in, the pilot struggled to lift off. Finally, he did.
As we flew away, the tears began to flow, and I was just so grateful to be alive. Colonel Madan, Ed, Veesters, the guys on the film crew, I literally owe them my life.
Yet, as remarkable as this rescue was, It could not dull the grief that settled over Everest after the worst disaster in the mountain's history. 8 people lost their lives in the storm.
We all went back down to base camp, and Paula and I held each other for a long time. The tragedies hit our team very hard, myself in particular, because Rob was a close friend, and it was very sad to think about his wife, who was 7 months pregnant, and realize that my good friend wouldn't be there to see his first child born.
Wait a moment. Well, I don't like climb a route with people dead on the way. I'm afraid of cross dead people and frozen, see them. I don't like. That's all.
Base camp was becoming a ghost town. Almost all the other expeditions packed up and left, and we thought maybe we should get out of there too. I sent word to the monastery asking if I should abandon the climb. 7 days went by, and I felt my dream slipping away. But then we got word about Beck, and that made me feel lighter and stronger.
A few days after Beck got back home to Dallas, he began the long road back to recovery. He would ultimately lose both of his hands to frostbite, but he never lost his spirit, never lost his will to live, and it was his remarkable recovery that lifted our spirits. We started to think about going up again, but a strong wind was still blowing a huge plume of snow off the summit, so it didn't look all that great.
There's no reason to climb with wind. If it's not possible, well, it's not possible. It's the mountain who said that you can climb or not.
I finally got word from the monastery. The gods were not opposed to my quest.
Each of the climbers made the same courageous decision. They had to try again. They held a puja ceremony to cleanse their spirits. Then they put aside their grief and followed Ed back up through the icefall once more.
When we get up to the middle camp, the wind was still very strong up above. We start to think we'll have to give up.
When the other Sherpas said they were afraid, I told them what my father had taught me. A climber must always treat the mountain with respect and use caution in the face of danger.
I just wasn't ready emotionally to have Ed trying for the summit again. So I just summoned up my courage and told him to go for it. It was the hardest thing I've ever done.
We were running out of time. We decided to go higher so we'd be in position to go for the top, if the wind stopped. But first we had to ascend the Lhotse face, which would be an exhausting 2-day climb.
The Lhotse face is a steep wall of ice, 4,000 feet high. We use fixed ropes, but people die here all the same. They unclip, make a mistake, and fall. After rocketing downhill for as much as a mile, they then plunge into a bottomless crevasse.
Up here, we really start to feel the lack of oxygen.
And that's the biggest danger on Everest. The less oxygen your brain gets, the harder it is to think straight. You believe your mind is sharp, but it's not.
Yeah, hi, Roger.
At high camp, we're already 3/4 of the way to the top. Finally, the wind on the summit had calmed down.
GPS all set up and it's collecting data.
At 26,000 feet, it was quite a struggle to set up the GPS receiver, and it worked.
Numbers coming in, so I hope you're happy about that.
I did not tell Roger that we could see hundreds of rocks that were once at the bottom of the sea. We've got enough to carry without picking up rocks for Roger.
You should be able to see us from Kalapatar.
May 22nd. The team would try for the summit that night, while Sumio stayed at the high camp as the radio contact, despite her cracked ribs. Ed wondered if Paula had received the video he had sent down to base camp.
By the time you get this video, I'll be heading for the summit. If I have to turn around, I will. I'll be very careful.
At this altitude, your mind runs in slow motion. You can't sleep, can't eat. Your brain is starving for oxygen, your body is deteriorating, and your muscles are wasting away. That's why a final 3,000 feet is known as the death zone. I was feeling tense, because in a few hours, I was going to set out on the climb of my life. It takes about 12 hours to get from high camp to the summit. You have to start around midnight, so you can get to the top by noon. Ed was going to climb without oxygen, so he started at 11 that night, an hour before the rest of us.
At midnight, it was 30 below zero. Araceli, Jamling, and 5 Sherpas packed up their oxygen supplies and started for the summit, following Ed's trail.
In the night, with my goggles and oxygen mask, I felt like I was on the moon. The others were nearby, but we never spoke. I felt completely alone. All I heard was the sound of my own breathing through the oxygen mask.
High on Everest, there is nothing to breathe. There is only 1/3 as much oxygen in each breath as there is at sea level. Most climbers need bottled oxygen up here, but not Ed.
You stagger along, every ounce of energy is sucked from your muscles. You just can't get enough air. This is what it must feel like to drown. The sun rose, but whenever I stopped to wait for the others, I got cold, so I had to move on. I climb without bottled oxygen because I like the challenge. It's just me and the mountain. It's as simple as that.
Hey, Paula, good news. I think I can see our team on the south summit, over.
The human body is not built to survive up here. It screams at you to turn around and go back.
It took all my strength and concentration just to put one foot in front of the other. I've never been so tired in my life. Sometimes I want to sit down in the snow and rest, but I told myself 10 more steps, and I keep going and going.
The wind begins to sound like drums in the monastery, but maybe that's just the blood pounding in my brain. As the pain gets worse, I feel that I'm closer to death than I've ever been, without passing over to the other side.
Every half hour, I radioed Sumio. Have you heard from Ed? Have you heard from Ed?
I knew exactly where I'd find Rob lying frozen in the snow. When I got there, I sat down next to him and cried. I wanted to hear his friendly New Zealand accent one more time. But then the voice I heard was Paula's, the echo of what she had said on the radio.
I said, climb this mountain like you've never climbed it before. And he said he was very choked up, but he said he thought about that all the way to the top.
Just below the summit is the most difficult pitch of the whole climb, a wall of rock and ice known as the Hillary Step. When I got past that, I knew I was going to make it. I radioed Paula and calmly told her I'd made it. But without bottled oxygen, I got too cold to wait for Araceli and John Ling. I passed them on my way down.
Then Ed came down from the summit and gave us a small hug. He told us the summit was not far.
After 12 hours of climbing, I had to really force myself to concentrate. There's a drop-off of over a mile on either side of the ridge.
There were only 100 meters left, but they were the longest 100 meters I did in my life.
After 9 long weeks on the mountain, they made it. And Araceli Segarra became the first Spanish woman to reach the top of the world.
When I got to the top, I was tired. But then I realized that I've really done it. And I started to feel happy. I was sure I could see halfway around the world. I wondered if my friends were thinking about me. They had no idea I was standing on the top of the world. I wanted to shout to them, "I'm okay, I made it." Even with cold hands, I took pictures of John Ling. He had worked hard to get here. I was so happy for him.
I've been dreaming of this moment since I was a boy. To finally stand on the summit, my heart just overflowed. My tears froze to my cheeks. I left a picture of my late mother, my late father, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and also a little toy I got from my 10-month-old daughter, and a prayer flag as an offering for Chomolungma, the mother goddess of the world.
When we started down, we were careful. No mistakes. But we hurried to see our friends at base camp. It's way down there, below the clouds.
As the team began the 2-day descent to base camp, they had time to reflect. They had never expected to be swept up in a disaster that would touch the whole world. Yet even in the face of extraordinary hardship, they had always acted with courage and grace.
I've never been so glad to see someone in my life.
We did it.
High on Everest, Roger's GPS was putting out data that one day may give geologists more insight into earthquakes. And Jamling's prayer flag fluttered in the wind at the top of the world and sent a different kind of message.
Looking back, I sometimes wonder how I found the strength to get to the top of Everest. I know now that my passion for climbing gave me the strength.
This year, Paula was waiting for me at base camp. It was wonderful. She put aside her own fears and encouraged me to climb. And that has made us closer than ever.
I didn't think getting to the top would change my life, but it has. Back in Kathmandu, I arranged an offering with 25,000 butter lamps to give thanks for our safe and wonderful climb. Those moments on the summit were sacred. Up there above the clouds, I touched my father's soul. Ever since I was a boy, I've looked up to him. But I always felt kind of a hunger inside to live up to his legend. I know he'd laugh to see me on the summit of Mount Everest. He'd say, "Jamlang, my son, you didn't have to come such a long, hard way just to visit me." As if he knew all along I was worthy of the mountain.